Hi, everybody. Welcome to this video on static electricity. Before we get started, you're going to need the static electricity notes for electricity 1, and you need something to write with. So if you don't have that, pause the video and go get it. Okay, I'm assuming you have those now. So before we get started, I want you to take a minute to do this quick little label of the diagram. So what are these arrows pointing to? Pause the video and do that right now. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully you got that this positive one here is a proton. The one right here pointing to this particle with no charge is a neutron. And this negative subatomic particle right here is, of course, an electron. Now, when we're learning about electricity, electrons are our most important subatomic particle. And I'll tell you why in just a sec. To move electrons, we use something called friction. You've probably heard about friction before. You can experience friction if you rub your hands together. It's friction causing the heat in your hands. So friction is the resistance that occurs when two objects are rubbed against each other. Now, this causes electrons to move, okay? The subatomic particles from the atom that can be moved by friction are only electrons. And if you look up at this diagram, that makes sense because electrons are on the outside, they're in the outer shell. If you are rubbing something against this, the particles that are going to be affected are the electrons. Okay, when we move electrons around, of course, you know from our chemistry unit, there is going to be charges moving too. So charges are denoted as a plus or a minus. For an object to be neutral, it has to have an equal number of positive and negative charges. So for example, if this balloon is a neutral object, we would show that by drawing an equal number of positives and negatives. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, so I've just got one of each there, or sorry, two of each there. And a neutral object can be charged through friction. So when you rub two objects together, they can become charged. And a positively charged object has more positive charges than negative charges. So we can show this. Let's put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pluses, because it's positive, but only 3 negatives. So during friction, the object that loses electrons becomes positively charged. This makes sense, right? Because electrons are negative. So when we lose those electrons, they become positive. Okay, flip it over. So we're going to do some activities on static electricity. And the objects that are going to become positively charged are things like paper towel, fur, wool. Okay, any kind of cloth really would become positively charged. A negatively charged object has more negative charges than positive charges. So during friction, the object that gains electrons, that's important here, gains electrons, becomes negatively charged. So let's draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives and only 2 positives. It doesn't really matter where in the object they are. So in our activities, the things that are going to become negatively charged are, we've got some plastic rods and some metal, sorry, not metals. The other thing we have are things like, rubber. Okay. So that's how objects become charged. There's also something called the law of electric charge, and this tells us how objects that are charged are going to act around each other. So opposite charges attract. We know this already from our chemistry unit. Opposite charges attract each other. So a positive object moves towards a negative object. And like charges repel each other. So if you have a positively charged object and another positively charged object, they are going to move away from each other. Okay. Now, electrons can also move through materials. So any material that electric charges can move through is called a conductor. Examples of conductors are things like there's certain metals. For example, silver is actually the best conductor of electrons and therefore electrical charge. Gold is a great one. Copper, a lot of our wires that conduct electricity are made of copper. Iron, even some alloys like steel. Another great conductor is salt water. So water with an ionic compound in it. So for example, like seawater is a good conductor. A material through which charges cannot travel at all is called an insulator. Things that are good insulators, which like prevent charges from traveling, are things like rubber, glass, oil. Covalent compounds are good insulators, usually cotton and paper. And also water, but only if it's pure water. If it has any ionic compounds in it, it will conduct electricity. And how easily charges move through a material is called its conductivity. Okay, so if electrons move easily through a material, it has high conductivity and it's a conductor. But if it's hard for electrons to move through a material, it has low conductivity and it's an insulator. I hope that makes sense. If not, please send me a message on Teams or we can talk in class. Have a great day.